I'm Errol Louis. For the last few weeks, we've been exploring the key voting blocks that could play a big role in deciding who becomes the next president of the United States. We've already discussed the Latino vote and the black vote. Tonight, we're going to take a closer look at the young vote. It's been more than 5 decades since the 26th Amendment to the Constitution was ratified, extending the right to vote to all Americans who are 18 years old and older, down from the previous federal voting age of 21. Ever since then, young voters have played a significant role in elections. In 2020, the estimates show that turnout rose dramatically, with about half of the youth electorate casting a ballot. That voting bloc has been a strong source of support for Democrats, with 59% supporting President Biden and 35% voting for Donald Trump back in 2020. This November, young people aged 18 to 27, which forms what's known as Generation Z, they're estimated to make up more than 40 million potential voters, and that includes an estimated 8 million Americans who are becoming eligible to vote this year alone. That's nearly 1/5 of the American electorate. And it's a diverse group. If you break it down by race, about 45% identify as young adults of color. Spectrum News reporter Logan Hall spoke to some first-time voters in California in this report.
He's waited 18 long years, and for the first time in his life, UC Irvine freshman and lifelong Orange County resident Nathan Bowie has a voice in this year's elections. Nathan is a politically active 18-year-old. He's a member of the Orange County Young Democrats Club and canvasses for local candidates on the weekends. He says there are a number of issues that are driving young Democrats in Orange County to the polls.
Of course, college affordability and housing affordability, I think those two things are intertwined and interlinked. And another thing that I'm looking towards is our climate crisis. It's not something that's a future issue. It's something that we need to be doing now because it's affecting us now.
First-time voters are fired up on both sides of the aisle. Second-year student and member of the Republicans of Cal State Fullerton, John Gaeta, says the economy is a driving factor for young voters.
As we're seeing like inflation go up and stuff, cost of gas, I don't know one college student who kind of will go fill up his car and be like, wow, that's paying a lot.
It's John's first ever presidential election, and he feels the weight of the moment, even more so on a college campus.
We need to have a voice, and we need to have a strong voice, so we don't get kind of dealt bad cards in the future.
Political science professor at Cal State Long Beach, Matt Lasenya, agrees. He says that this demographic has the potential to swing an election, but older candidates like President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump are having a hard time connecting with this age group.
Older candidates will tout that their experience and their knowledge of the game, so to speak, is an advantage. But it's difficult to communicate that when, I would argue, a lot of the communication methods and the news sources are increasingly online, and you don't really have a sense that either candidate has a technological savvy.
For Nathan, he feels proud to finally have a say in the politics that impacts the community he spent his whole life in.
I think there's a gap right now between what we expect from our leaders and what we're getting, and I think the way that we bridge that gap is by voting and by making our voices heard and making them know that they need to care about young voters just as much as they care about old voters.
Excited to participate in democracy for the very first time. Logan Hall, Spectrum News.
Joining me now to talk more about the youth vote is Kei Kawashima-Ginsberg of CIRCLE, which stands for the Center for Information and Research on Civic Learning and Engagement at Tufts University. They've been conducting in-depth research on young voters for many years. And Professor, I want to start with a little bit of history surrounding young voters. What difference has the youth vote made in past presidential elections? Have any races clearly been decided by young people?
Young people have always been a decisive factor in multiple states, in that many elections at the state level, including electoral college elections, have been really close. And whether young people turn out and whom young people support, which only in recent cycles have been decisively in favor of Democratic candidates, have ended up deciding many candidates' fate because they come out in large numbers and they make really decisive choice, preferring some candidates by 30, 40 points differential at times. So without naming some specific states, there's been multiple times when young people's vote was crucial, as well as other groups, but without young people's votes, some of the electoral outcomes have been different.
Okay, now your organization has been in touch with many of these young voters all around the country. You've conducted many surveys about their voting preferences with an eye toward trying to increase engagement. What do you expect turnout to look like in November?
So we continue to see really strong engagement and passion from young people who have a lot of opinions about what should be happening to the country, especially the issue of economy, um, particularly around how they can afford to live in this country. In many communities, like housing, healthcare, have been on top of their mind. So that's been really an important issue for young people. At the same time, young people of course, have been very involved in activism, both on campuses and in the communities, to really talk about issues that are relevant for them. Things like gun violence prevention, reproductive health, and climate have been some of the big issues and continue to be for young people this cycle.
Well, yeah, we've certainly seen a large nationwide movement by young college students protesting the war in Gaza. How much of an issue do you think that will be? And will it affect young voters who happen to not be in college?
There's such diversity within youth electorate, both in terms of whether they currently plan to vote. There's a huge variations between group, particularly those who have never been to college, and our young voters currently are the lowest among them in intending to vote. Their issue choices, of course, are very different in that they tend to care more about economy and affordability of their living, as opposed to perhaps college students who are really actively talking about what they think is the right thing to do for our country with regards to Gaza and Israel. But when you look at the nationwide data, foreign policies tend to really rank on the low side. So both in terms of how qualified young people feel to talk about politics, intend to vote in November, and which issues really mobilize them really depends on what young people you are talking about.
A national poll, Professor, by the Institute of Politics at Harvard last month found that if the election were held today, President Biden would outperform Donald Trump 50% to 37%. What does your research say about youth support for President Biden this year compared to 2020?
So that data about tracks what we've seen in the past. And what I say about young people and President Biden in particular is that they supported President Biden by a large margin in 2022, but they were not necessarily enthusiastic about the president candidate by then. So just because young people don't say they're enthusiastic and in love with President Biden today, it doesn't necessarily mean that they won't come out to support President Biden in comparison to other candidates, including former President Trump.
Thank you very much, Kei Kawashima-Ginsberg. Thank you for watching our YouTube channel. Let Spectrum News be your resource for balanced, in-depth political coverage, and click the subscribe button right here. You can also download our app or watch us on TV to learn more about the candidates, where they stand on the issues, and more. We'll see you then.